Okay, let's try this first take. This is John McKay. I am the Cranky Historian, coming to you live from Cranky Historian headquarters in the Casa McKay and ongoing soiree, Northwest Georgia. It's a cool winter day, and you're probably wondering why I am here. And I'm sort of wondering the same. I was a high school teacher. I was a historian. Wrote some books, did some other things. As you can see by my t-shirt, I just came back from the gym a little while ago. I was in the U.S. Army, and thanks to Airborne Apparel, I finally can own my own Jungle Operations t-shirt again. And I like to talk about history. I like to, this is one thing I didn't like about teaching, is I couldn't sit there and talk about things, because in high school and in college, when you're doing a course, it's a survey course. You've got to go from point A to point B to point C to point D, and you only have X amount of time, and you don't really get a chance to talk about what's important about history and what is history and why is history important, and why are we even doing this to begin with. And if I can give an example, why is history important? Take a look at politics today. And I don't want to do politics 24/7 on this channel. I'm going to have to touch on it because, that's a big part of history in the United States. But if you look at what's going on today, you have a large number of young people who are out in the streets like they were over the last weekend and last week, demanding that certain federal agencies leave their areas and not carry out enforcement of federal laws as they're charged with doing. And at the same time, they're calling for a communist-style government. We need communism today. I saw those signs on the high school student sign. Well, when I was in high school 50-something years ago, there was a lot of people demanding exactly the same thing. Let's have communism and all that. And even way back then, it was known that this is a failed system. Communism began, as you probably know, with a man named Karl Marx, who wrote a book called The Communist Manifesto. And in there, he outlined a type of government. And you can kind of sum it up as people get what they need and they do what they can do. Okay, sounds good. It sounds great. And if you are a high school student, and this is nothing derogatory about them, but they are ignorant. They do not have life experience. They have not lived long enough to understand how things really work. They have not had to do things like pay taxes or run a business or work for somebody, probably. And they have not participated in government for very long, if at all, but they do hear from their teachers, who tend to be very liberal. Let's promote this style of government that's much fairer than a capitalistic style government, where you have to work for what you earn, and you have private property, and other people can't have that, and you have your stuff and they have their stuff, and that doesn't seem right. Well, when you're young and you're really coming out of a communist society where you are completely dependent on your parents to just simply give you everything, and that's communism in a nutshell. And they're not expecting anything back from you. But here's the problem, is that it doesn't take into effect human nature. And human nature is, well, if I have to work for something, then I'm going to, if I have a reward at the end of that, that means I have a motivation. And I'm going to be motivated to do what I can do to get that. If I have to work so many hours, so many days, so many years to buy a house or buy a car or whatever, then I'm going to be highly motivated to do that. Now, under a communist-style government, if the government decides, okay, well, you need a car, okay, and so what motivation do you have to work for one? You have none. Matter of fact, in the old days of the Soviet Union, which is probably the flag bearer of communist societies, and failed communist societies, which all of them are eventually, they had a saying that said that, the government pretends to pay me and I pretend to work. So you end up with these situations where you have a society that completely rots from within, which is what happened to the Soviet Union. And at the same time, it's struggling to stay in control. What ends up happening is you have all of the power coalesce in a very small group of people, because they have to organize things you understand. And, if they're working that hard, they should earn a little bit more. And George Orwell in the book Animal Farm actually said it best. All animals are equal, but some animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. And this is how communism ends up happening. So today you could tell the kids this, and you can say, well, look, give it a few years, give it 10, 20 years. You'll be an adult, you'll be in your 30s, and you'll work for a while, and you start understanding, wow, these tax monies that come out of my paycheck, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money that I'm working for. The last I heard, the average American worker has to work through, I think it's right about April 15th, which is ironic. And all of that money he earns to that point goes to the government through taxes, through federal, state, local taxes, sales taxes, this tax, that tax, whatever. And what are you getting back from this? Well, as we are learning in 2025 and 2026, a lot of that money goes to things that we probably don't think are worth spending our money on. But do we have a way of controlling that? Well, we do. In this capitalist constitutional republic that we do have a way of affecting that. In a communist society, well, they can listen to you, or they can say, well, you're counter-revolutionary, and we think you need to go work in the gulag for 20, 30 years, breaking rocks, and maybe you'll understand then. And that's exactly how the Soviet Union worked. Red China does the same thing. North Korea takes it to a new level. They have concentration camps where if you get sent, your entire family gets sent, and it's usually for life, and they're brutal. This is the way these kind of societies run. So this is a very, very short initial lesson. Why history is important. You study the history. Has this ever happened before in all of human history? Well, yeah. The Bible says, nothing is new under the sun, and nothing is new. What was new, what was old, 3,000 years ago is still old today, plus 3,000 years. So if it can be done, it probably has been tried. And we can look in history, and we can talk about history, and not just in a survey course, but really dive into it and say, what is it that made it not work? You can say, well, communism did not work. And if I was a kid, and when I was a kid, I was a socialist, flat out socialist, especially when I started working on an ambulance, and especially when I had a really bad boss who wanted to put credit card stickers on the ambulance. I was working for a private company for a while. And and he was wondering where to put them on the ambulance. I sarcastically said to him, why don't you put them on the ceiling of the ambulance above where the patient's lying on the stretcher so they can know how they can pay for this? And he thought that was a grand idea. I was being sarcastic. Because I believe then, and honestly I still believe today, that things like emergency ambulances, not necessarily transport, what's called general transport, which that company was. Meaning I'm taking grandma to the doctor, or I'm doing your 3 times a week dialysis trip. Not that, but 911 where you're calling for an emergency. I do not believe that that's a good avenue for a capitalist private company. I think that government does have a role. Firefighting, law enforcement. There's things that naturally lean towards that model that work very well. So who am I? I'm very conservative. I joke that I'm about 3 steps to the right of Attila the Hun, and that's a joke. But honestly, I think there is, as far as financial, fiscal policy goes, there's a role for a central government. There is a place to have the government paying for certain things and not us. But on the other hand, does government need to run every aspect of our life? Should you have a religious test to sit in a political seat? Well, we threw that out a long time ago because we decided, rightfully so, that this is probably not a good idea when you have a pluralistic society like we do. Is this a Christian nation? Yes, it started as one. Is it still a Christian nation? No, it is not. It is a secular nation. Does it have Christian roots that underlie everything that we built this country on? Absolutely. Do all of our government documents that every law is based on, is that based on men who were deeply Christian and used Christian values to write those? Yes, absolutely. Does that mean that if you're a Muslim or an atheist or a Jew or whatever, does that mean that this is not your country? Absolutely not. This is absolutely your country. Just because we have Christian roots. But that is why even hardcore atheists like Richard Dawkins and others talk about how, yeah, this is a Christian country, and that's good because those Christian values are good. Now, I will say, and I will talk more about my past as we go along, I was raised as an atheist. My father was very much one and very vocal about it. And he really, truly, truly hated Christians. I became a Christian when I was 42. And there's a long story behind that. But I came from that environment. And even there, I recognized, okay, if you do not have a foundational values, if you do not have goalposts that you can say, okay, this is good and this is bad, then how do you set those? And that's where everything starts becoming very difficult. If you want to talk about very inflammatory issues, let's talk about abortion. Is that something that should be allowed? Is that something that should be shunned? Well, where does the government fit into there? That's a difficult one. When it comes to, let's say, armed robbery. Is armed robbery bad? Well, I think everybody would say, yeah, you put a gun in my face and you take my money and my wallet and my cell phone, and yeah, that's bad. And I don't think anything but I would argue against that. But if you are truly an atheistic person that does not believe in any foundational values whatsoever, how do you say that is bad? Well, you can go back in history and you can pull some stuff out of some other civilizations and say, well, they didn't have this. They didn't have Christ. They didn't have the Christian religion. So how did they set things up? And they did. There has been many societies many thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of societies that were successful that were not based on Christianity. And what did they base their things on? Well, this is where you come into history. This is where you look back and you say, well, hey, did that work for these people? Did this work for these people? And let's talk about that in detail. And that's the serious stuff. And I do like talking about that, and I think it's interesting. But honestly, I like the stories. What is history? History is there's three kinds. There's three factors into history. Like I like to say, number one is the names and dates and battles and generals, and that's what you get in high school, and that's why everybody hates it. And that's chronology. And it's honestly like watching grass grow sometimes. I mean, do you really want a full day lecture on the era of good feelings? Probably not. Even though I think that would be interesting now because we could probably call this the era of bad feelings. As a matter of fact, I'm going to promote that and say, why don't we start calling, the aught 26s, aught 20s post-COVID period, the era of bad feelings? I think that would work. But then you'd have to know what was the era of good feelings and why did we feel so good? So, I'm undermining my own argument, but I do that a lot. Secondly, you have the expanded version of chronology. You have the stories. It's like if my field when I was first doing this was Civil War history. I've been fascinated since I was a kid with Civil War history because I had so many relatives who fought in the war. My great-grandfather, who my father knew, was a very badly wounded Confederate private in the 26th Alabama. And listening to his stories, secondhand stories about fighting in the Civil War as a kid. And this seems so long ago, but it really wasn't that long ago. The last widow of a Civil War veteran died less than 20 years ago. Now, you're probably going, what? And I'm like, yeah, last widow. Woman married to a man who fought in the Civil War died less than 20 years ago. Well, that sounds like an interesting story, and it is. It's fascinating. These stories are great. This is where you get in and you get to talk. You get to storytelling. This is cool, and this is primarily what I'm seeing cranky old historians shouts at clouds about being. And then thirdly, you have analysis, historical analysis. Okay, you got the names and dates and battles and generals. You got the stories. What does it all mean? What does it indicate? What use is it? And this is where the shouting at the clouds part comes. There's an old saying that people who don't study history repeat it, and people who do study, sit by helplessly watching everybody else repeat it. Well, it's not really repeated per se. There's a theory of history that says everything's circular. You're always coming back. No, history is very linear. Very linear. It's got a beginning and it's going to have an end. And I will say, point blank, we are way closer to the end than we are to the beginning of human history. But what does that all mean? When you have a story and you have the dates and you know all the basic facts, this is where you go beyond high school and even college history. This is why guys my age, old, retired, old farts like me, we get interested in history, because finally we're saying, this is interesting, because like 5 minutes away from me, and I didn't know this till we moved here, 5 minutes away from me was a small Civil War battle that one of my great-grandfathers fought in. I had never even heard of the battle. And I went, it was very small, more of a skirmish than a battle. But it led up to a larger battle, and he was there, and I didn't know that. And it's like, wow, that's fascinating. So you got a personal connection to all this. And then the family stories you hear. But what does that mean? Well, my grandfather's story, well, it's interesting. It's significant because it's my family's history. And nobody else would be interested. But as I said earlier, what's significant about the history of politics is, have we ever tried this before? Have we ever tried that method before? Well, you'll find out that pretty much every way to govern probably has been done before. And it's very useful to look at the lessons from that. Look at the lesson of the Soviet Union. It failed spectacularly. Look at the lesson of communist China. It's technically still communist, but it's become a free market society. Look at the lesson of North Korea, that started off as a communist society and turned into a personality cult, and a bad one too. Then you look at other countries, and you look at Western Europe, and you see the struggles they're having now, and we need to do this. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get away from their roots, especially England. England is heading towards some bad things, because they're trying to say, well, to make our society better and to make it grow and to make the people who come here feel like they're a part of our inclusive part of our society, to feel included in everything, we've got to get rid of all the old stuff. No, you don't. You just teach the new people about the old stuff, and then you include their lessons with you. My family came here in 1775. We have fought in every American war, including the American Revolution. We're one of the old people. We've got people who came here last week. They're still a part of this country. Even the so-called illegals are a part of our undocumented visitors, or whatever they're called these days. They're a part of the history of this nation. And I will add one last thing. History is neutral. There is no such thing as being on the right side of history or the wrong side of history, because there's no side. It's just history. Now, the lessons that you take from that. Should we let Austrian failed painters who really hate the Jewish people become a dictator over all of Germany? Probably not. That probably would be a bad idea. And that's being a little funny, but also being real serious. It's like you could take a lot of lessons of what's happened just in the last century here, the last century and a half, and say, okay, there's been a lot of things that have happened, a lot of things that have been tried, a lot of things that have people have tried to do and proposed and tried to force. And then you see what happens afterwards. And not only from politics, but you can get all the way down to your individual lives. I mean, if you want to go and become a successful businessman, is there a history of business? Oh, absolutely. If I want to give away all my products for free and say, pay me what you feel like owing me, you'll discover real fast that's not a good business model in most fields. There's a couple of exceptions to that. And, we can talk about that. Even things like you see behind me, I have, this is in my office. I have a lot of books behind me, and these are some of my favorite books. And is there a way to write a book that's interesting? Is there a way to write a book that's bad? Is there a way to paint a picture on the front of the book that really reflects what's inside and makes people want to read it? Oh, yeah. So you study the history of this, and then you learn how to do things. And that's what this podcast, this video cast, this channel is supposed to be all about. And I want to talk about some things, but this is just kind of an introduction. I mentioned earlier I've done a lot of things. I was a teacher for a long time. I was a administrator with Department of Defense for an education program for quite some time, and I ended up retiring from that last year. Before that, I was a firefighter paramedic for many years, and before that, I was a combat medic with the U.S. Army. So I've been around. I've seen some things. I've done some things, and this is what, as a teacher and historian, I kept trying to do. And I had some kids, some really good students, and I still stay in touch with some of them. I'm very fortunate that way. And they've come back to me later and said, we really appreciate you teaching us about life. And I'm like, I was telling my wife one day, I said, I have no idea what they're talking about. I just taught the lesson. And she was saying, well, the way you teach lessons is the way, that you say, well, this is how this works today. And you try to give examples and illustrate it. I said, well, that's true. And I did. I tried to help them understand why did we fight the Civil War? Why did we fight the American Revolutionary War? Why did we have an era of good feelings? And I really like the era of bad feelings for today. I'm really going to push that really hard. But anyhow, this is going on about 3 times as long as I really wanted to make this particular little reel. But this gives you an idea of what I'd like to talk about, and I hope you'll come back. I'm planning on doing 1 or 2 of these a week, and I have some topics that I'd like to talk about. One of my cousins is a history fan, and he sent me a list of things he would like to see me talk about. And I hope we'll have a good time together, and I hope to see you back here soon. And thanks a lot for visiting the Cranky Old Historian.